So let's just conclude this story about the book eater so that people won't be left hanging on that one. It turned out that the book eater was a very devout Christian who had been taught all of her life that you can't be angry at all, and her husband was infuriating. And so she was very, very low joy, which gave her cravings. And she craved eating something, that's what her craving was. And so she had found, at one time in a moment of desperation, she stuffed a sheet of paper in her mouth and chewed on it. And that led to every time she was desperate, she would put some sheet of paper in, and she was running out of paper, and so she grabbed a book, and so then she, but she could not let herself know that she was angry at her husband. So this proved to be the perfect obsessive compulsive pattern, because as long as she was thinking about how awful it was and upsetting it was to eat books, the thought never crossed her mind that she might be angry at her husband. So it served as a perfect block, while at the same time, was always available. So she could maintain this pattern for as long as she needed to, sort of without side effects, because it upset her in a way that distracted her from what was really upsetting. And so really, as soon as she was able to admit and begin to talk about, level 3 could process that she was actually feeling angry at her husband, the book eating stuff just disappeared as, almost just like, ooh. You could just see that she could talk about that. And she still had never developed, to the best of my knowledge, a relationship with her husband that anyone would want to have. But at least she was able to process this, that I just feel that angry at him. And so that's the book eating story right there. You could call it somatization if you wanted, but it was actually the perfect example of how obsessive thinking works. Obsessive thinking works by blocking the thing that really bothers you, but it has to be bothersome enough that the obsessive thinking bothers you, but you'd rather be bothered by that than what you're really bothered by. And so that's almost always the dynamic with obsessive thinking of some kind or another. It produces something similar to the feeling that you're trying to block, but without letting you notice the source. So, and of course there are genetic and all kinds of other factors that make you prone to this, but that's what makes the mechanism so successful. So that's the story there. Feel better? Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So let's move back now to the 3 ways of passing the peace. So the first way is you can guide someone through it. It seems to be it takes us about 5 days to teach people who know nothing about it how to use this system to guide somebody else. Teaching people how to guide people in the group is about a half a day. So you can teach people how to do this in a group very quickly, and you reach large numbers of people. And whenever I've done it with Dr. Lehman, he says every time I walk around a group and this is being done, I hear traumas that if we had a 0 to 10 scale, with 10 being the most difficult problem for a psychiatrist to help someone resolve, I hear 9.5s being resolved all around the room whenever I walk around in this kind of a context. And that fits again with what I'm seeing around the world. But the point is, you never know if there's going to be one or not. Is God going to be resolving a trauma? Is he going to be building a relationship with somebody who doesn't have a bond with him? And I call that resolving a trauma. In fact, I would call it resolving a bigger trauma than having something bad happen to you. If you feel like God doesn't love you, that's worse than anything that might happen to you, but we don't normally call that a trauma. So again, back to this. God is building a relationship with his people, teaching us how to act like ourselves, and how we act like ourselves is we always remember we have a relationship with him and others. So it's very simple process that way. Now the third way is the way that I've already mentioned to you that Anna and Sung Shim developed, which is got dubbed Emmanuel Journaling by the YWAM group. I wouldn't have called it journaling. I call it texting with God, because a lot of people don't like to journal, but almost everybody likes to text. And so again, the idea is you send God a text of something that you appreciate, and then you write down how he would answer that. What would he say to you if you said thank you to him, you appreciate something? How does he answer back? And almost every culture that I know of, if you say thank you to someone, it demands an answer back. So people have the internal expectation that you couldn't possibly say thank you to God and have him just give you a blank stare. I mean, even the rudest people in most cultures will, if you thank them, say something back. So it seems to be a very powerful dynamic in almost every culture that we're tapping into right there, that allows people to overcome their resistance to writing down the first thing that God might say to me. The second thing that we tell people is that the better you are at doing this, the less you'll be able to know whether it was your thought or God's thought. Because God's thoughts, when they're like our thoughts, which is why we call it thought rhyming when we're talking about it. When God's thoughts are like our thoughts, we don't know, we can't tell whether it was his thoughts or our thoughts. It's a mutual mind state. Whether we explain that or not, it's like what we're trying to do is learn to think the way that God does, so that when we say, we're writing down what he would say to us, it's so close to what we would say to us that we can't really tell for sure that it's his or us, him or us talking. Except that, when it's him talking, the peace goes deeper. So the test then becomes, when we hear this and write it down, does it feel peaceful? But the interesting thing is that as we write it through run this through the writing circuit, writing is all over here on this side of the brain pretty much. Right? So it's all left brain processes, putting things into word. We're actually shortcutting a lot of the processing that would go on relationally, because there's no one here, there's just me and my pencil and paper and stuff like that. None of my relational cues are being set off. I don't know what's going on here, so until I read it out loud in relationship to other people, it doesn't really process through the auditory, what's the voice tone, what's the reaction. So people inevitably, when they read it out loud, a very large number of them will say, wow, I had a much stronger reaction to reading it out loud than I had when I wrote it down. When I wrote it down, I wasn't sure if it was important. When I read it out loud, I had a completely different reaction to what I was reading. What I wasn't sure if it was important to begin with, because it had just kind of gotten over here to being put in words and written out. When it got processed again through the right side, it was like, whoa, that really kind of went deep. And then if we're in harmony with other people, we're around other people who recognize God's voice, and we bother to look at their faces as we're reading this out loud, we realize that what's being amplified, especially of peace and all that's resonating with other people, that really seems true, that really seems true, actually turns up the volume on the things that God wants to say to us. So I've got a group of 5 people, all of whose faces is looking at me going, yeah, I really meant that. And it's like, oh, every place I look, God is looking at me saying, yeah, that's really true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or you're going like, not bringing me peace. And the interesting thing again is if you're dealing with narcissistic people and narcissistic Christian circles, people create a false sense of peace by getting everyone to agree with me. So then I can fool myself that, I remember one fellow, saying like, I'm God's appointed leader here. So the fact that I've been having an affair with somebody, that doesn't matter because I'm the one that God's assigned to teach and preach and run this church, and no one else has that mantle of authority except me, and that feels completely true, and I'm peaceful with that, and nothing bothers me about it. I'm looking around the room here, and I have to say I'm not seeing a lot of we're all going like, oh yeah, that just strikes me as so God. I'm like, Right. Now, I never have been run out of a church faster than when I stood up in that church and told him what it was registering on my God meter. I remember that day rather distinctly. I've not been invited back, by the way. But oddly enough, the church stayed with them, most of them. Wow. So that tells you something about the whole system right there. But it didn't give me a witness. I mean, not the kind of witness that was peaceful, right? And as you're listening here, I'm going like, you know what? I think you're all getting kind of the same thing. This not a peaceful, all of those things sound like God, and that there's a mantle. Yes, there's a mantle. There's a leader. There's an assigned person. He does forgive. But when you put it all together, it sounds like a weasel to me. Right? And I really hate to say that about weasels, because we got some really cute ones up on Colorado. So, they're just the cutest little things. So, it's my apologies to them. So we get back here and then we say, now, if this becomes our way of life, so that we regularly, when we get together, we say, let's listen together. Someone said about what a lot of the spiritual disciplines is co-discernment. We and other people are discerning and listening to God. But when we think of discernment, we tend to get it too far away from relationship. We tend to think of discernment as instructions. So you're getting your instructions right or not. That's not particularly relational or joyful. So, again, we're not trying to figure out what God's will is in terms of instructions. We're trying to increase how well we love God. Because, just when we're with Him, we just can't help but, respond to that by going, oh, that was so good. It was difficult, but so good. Or it was just wonderful, but so... That's what we're trying to build with each other. And so the third method then is not just texting with God, but it's texting with God among His people. And we tend to find that we can teach this in somewhere around 90 minutes. Right? So it's not that hard. I see you. I hear you. I care about you. I'm glad to be with you, and I'll do something for you. Now, that didn't take 90 minutes. It just takes 90 minutes to talk you into trying it and reading it to each other, and you go, wow, well, there's something in there. Right? And then, typically, your brain doesn't realize that this could happen again until you've done it 3 times. So if we went a little bit farther than 90 minutes, we run this through 3 times, people go like, oh, I know how to do this. I could tell somebody else how to do this. You just write down something I'm thankful for, and then God's response, and I see you, I hear you, I care about you, I'm glad to be with you, and I'll do something for you. And I actually have symbols for that, like I put an eye, and then an ear, and then a heart, and then an X, which means like a hug, and then a little picture of a hand. And we're like, okay, right now next to those pictures there, whatever came up. Now, if an oral tradition culture, I don't have them write it down, right? Just tell somebody. And in oral tradition cultures, they have no trouble saying, okay, now what does God see? What does He hear? What does He care about? Is He with you? Yes. But because oral tradition cultures, you only have to tell them the sequence once. As soon as you tell them, it's like, oh yeah, okay. Well, God sees this, and He hears this, and He cares about this, and He's with me in this, and He says He's going to And it's really beautiful if you try this with children under age 5, because it just flows right out of their little mouths. Now between 5 and 7, you have a developmental stage that's a little tricky. And that is, between 5 and 7, your brain is trying to sort out what I imagine and what I feel from what really happens. And so we need people to tell us the truth, like you're just imagining Jesus. And so at that age, they start saying, from 5 to 7, they start saying like, well, Jesus wants me to have all of the candies in the house. Right? You say, well, you know what? That doesn't give me a shalom. I think you imagined that. So Jesus says it's okay to hit my brother because he was doing something. Well, you know what? That doesn't give me a shalom. I think you imagined that, you know. You can imagine Jesus saying that, but that doesn't mean he did. Well, you feel like hitting your brother. Yeah, that's your feelings. Those are your genuine feelings. Yes, that's true. But we sort these things out if we're around people that will tell us the truth about it. If you're with people who won't tell you the truth about what they feel, you won't sort this out, and you'll end up deciding that my feelings are reality. Because I can't trust anybody else, so I'm going to trust my own feelings. And you very quickly know when you've encountered somebody who that was how their 5 to 7 year old life went. But it's kind of funny watching kids, because predictably, under 5, it's like pure Jesus pouring out. Suddenly at 5, you're getting all these stories about, you know, Jesus said it would be okay if I go outside and play all night. Like, no, it doesn't give me a... They don't think of that earlier. But at that age, it's part of a developmental task. It's not like the devil is suddenly taking hold of their mind. They just now get so much better at imagining that it's hard to know whether I'm imagining it or whether it's really happening. And how many people ask you the question, well, I don't know if I'm imagining what God's saying to me or it's actually happening, right? Because there's, you know, we've never learned to sort that out well with other people. So you can anticipate that everybody who never had a chance to sort out what I'm imagining very well from what God's actually saying is going to have anxiety around that when you get to this point. So you smile and go to yourself, oh, I know what your life was like between 5 and 7. You could at least talk to people about it, otherwise you just tell, you wouldn't even ask me. But they weren't very helpful at sorting out what your imagines from your actually feelings. And so I'm really be glad to help you with that. Say, oh yeah, that's just what we love to talk about around here, you know. And how we can tell is because, well, first of all, if things are going really well, we can't tell. Oh, really? Yeah, because we're thinking so much like Jesus is thinking that we can't tell whether it's us or him, and we just feel so peaceful. But the other thing we're looking for is a peace that goes a little bit different than if we just imagined it. So does that peace stay with us? Does it like to be with us? Does it lead us into an interaction with God beyond what we were dealing with? And so we begin to just test these things developing together. You see, it's relatively simple to do with anyone, basically about 18 months of age on. This is open. What if we taught all of our kids to do this? What if we just practiced it in the family? What if every time we lost our peace as a family, we said to our kids, you know, it's okay to mention we've lost our peace. And when we do we have a repair strategy? Right? This is a question for the left hemisphere right there. Is there a repair strategy when we lose our peace? Yes. Mm-hmm. And we would start with thankfulness or appreciation, right? And from that, we would then listen to what God wants to say that would bring us peace, and then we'll tell each other. That's our repair strategy. Doesn't sound too complicated. You need a very advanced education to do it? No? Could you teach that to someone as a professional counselor? Well, not in California, but, right? Here you can. So, yeah, this is the great state of Texas, right? God is still allowed in Texas? Yes. All right. So, again, we're looking at 3 relatively simple ways of teaching people we're always relational. This is what our people are like. We're always relational in connection to God. When our thoughts are thinking like His thoughts, right? We don't know that it's the right thing to do, but we feel peaceful in the sense that everything fits together and it makes sense in a way that's deeper than even our understanding. But in case we are doubtful about it, we look in the eyes of everyone else who's connected with God, and we can tell from their eyes whether in fact they're hearing the same thing we are. Because we can imagine things and we can fool ourselves and we can make ourselves feel peaceful or even sometimes agitated when that's not quite right. But the people around us, because it'll run the other way too, right? It feels peaceful to everybody around when they heard it, but the person themselves is still agitated. Have you ever, does that make sense? Yeah. I heard something, but I just don't believe it. Does it feel true? Well, no, not yet. I mean, I've got all this stuff running over here that still bothers me about all this heavy traffic on the left hemisphere that says, could this be the Messiah? Would He talk to Samaritan woman? I got a lot of heavy traffic over here that's not quite settled down yet. Something over here on this other side says I know something that I know. So it sort of feels true that way, but does it feel peaceful? No, it's stirring up all kinds of dust over here yet, but everyone else listening to it is going like, yeah? Mm-hmm. Well, let's find out why it's still stirring up dust. What else does Jesus want you to know about that? Because we've just triggered into something that wasn't just a one-answer question, right? But our people go like, no, I think we're on the track of something here, because what you just said there about, Jesus really loves you in spite of everything you've ever done. That just feels really true to me. So let's ask Him what else you need to know right now. And this is not remarkable. It happens all the time, right? We understand that it takes a while for the whole system to get everything that we have stored in there to agree with each other and have cleared out everything that isn't true. And right? Not surprising? Not unusual? Right. Nothing about this? Okay. So, here's what I want us to do, which I think is a bit fun, and I hope you think it's a bit fun too, and it takes us to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, at long last. Okay, so, going to Sri Lanka was one of the more far-out adventures I've had following God in my life. And at the time, the Tamil Tigers, they had a 25-year civil war going, and the Tamil Tigers were for the Tamil tribe, and then there was the main government. The Tamil Tigers were rated as worse than Al-Qaeda at the time, as far as terrorist activities were concerned. The government, on the other hand, was suppressing the Tamil Tigers by techniques and things that were worse than what they were doing. So most of the Western governments had denounced the government for being more oppressive than their Al-Qaeda type things. So you imagine kind of what the environment was like. All of the Western people had been thrown out, and poor Sri Lanka had a major tsunami. Do you remember that? With all of these people killed. So we've got 25 years of fighting and tribal warfare, and we've got this major tsunami with all the deaths, and the Western groups went in to teach them trauma resolution by going in and have people retell their trauma to you, and then we share it with you and try to tell you something, help you with something positive at the end. And all of us know this kind of Western trauma recovery method. Well, after a year of doing that, all the trauma workers, every one of them had secondary PTSD. None of them would do any trauma recovery unless they were being paid, and well over half of them had quit So you couldn't pay me enough money to go back and get this job. So I don't care if there is no other employment. I'd rather be unemployed than be helping people with trauma recovery. So this is not exactly what I would call working well. So a group from Europe was started looking on the web to see, is there any kind of trauma recovery that's matched with reconciliation? So you actually would be not just resolving trauma, but actually rebuilding a people. And somehow they came across the life model. I have no idea how. I sort of think it might have been, I like to attribute it to God for helping them find our website, because it's an incredibly bad website and poorly organized. And there's absolutely nothing about that would make me think that this was a resource to anybody. Right. So, you know, it's completely up, you know, against all odds that these people called me up and they said, well, here's what I want you to do. We want you to come to the country. And when you when you're in the airport, tell them you're going to stay at this hotel, because security will ask you where you're going. And just say you're there and you're going to stay in the hotel and just, you know, experience their country. You know, you're there for a vacation. And so when I got there, I told them I'm going to stay in this hotel. And when you go outside, there'll be a person there wearing a red coat. Follow him. This is all I know. All right? So the other thing that I had said to them is, because they want tribal reconciliation, I said, well, you're going to have to bring together the people from both tribes if we're going to do tribal reconciliation. They said, well, we can't get the two in one room. So I said, well, but if you don't get the two of them in one room, I can't show you how to get reconciliation to happen. So I don't know how you're going to do it, but get them there. So this left on their side that they have to get me to an undisclosed location where neither side can know where I'm going, or they're going, or why they're there, and they can get everybody there at once past all the government roadblocks and blockades and everything like that, without me being discovered as being from the you know, a U.S. or one of the Western powers who've all been blocked from coming to the country because the government's been denied. So there's all this stuff going on. It was just perfectly strange. Well, I went outside and it was about 110, 115 degrees. There's only one person wearing a coat. And no one else was wearing red. So one poor fellow sweating in a red coat, there was no difficult whatever. So from that point on, we didn't go to the hotel or anything else. They took me in an undisclosed location. To this day, they've never told me where they took me. And you know, we brought these people together. And so he said, you have a week here. You're going to teach us how you do this. So what I was going to do was I was going to teach them the manual process, the group process, right? The one I've just been through. What we were going to do is every time we ran through that Emmanuel process to get them to describe what changed when they experienced God's presence. We had in this nice location about 3 of those great big huge whiteboards, and we were going to write down the words that described the effects. You know, what effect did it have when God showed up in your mind? Because He was always there. And it took me a little while to convince them that He was always there, because although most of these are pastors, they started out with the impression that if you sinned, God wouldn't be there. So to get to the point where you thought God was still there while you're sinning, it took about a half a day of debate between all the Christian pastors there. And they ended up settling, yeah, even if you're sinning, God would be there. So, okay, now being the case that He's there even if something sinful is happening, are you aware of Him? Everyone agreed, no, we're not aware of Him. So that's where we're going to go. So when you're aware of Him, I want you to give me a word for what happens. And so what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to do the texting with God, and I'm going to ask Him what He wants you to know, or I could do it the other way around. I could lead the whole group through a group process and say what God wants you to know. But, well, actually, which one would you rather do? The group or the texting with God? Either one gets the same result. So, how many for group? How many for texting? Yeah, we're split. Okay. I'll have to be led by the Spirit. Okay. But what we're looking for is we're going to look for a word that describes what happened. What happened when you became aware of God's presence? When He spoke to you? What changed? What's a word to describe the change? Now, it's sort of hard to do because, especially we're talking about something upsetting, we've spent a long time being aware of being upset and we've got a good vocabulary for it. But what God just did, we haven't really thought about very long. And we may or may not have a word to describe what that is. And very often we have to work together to say, well, it's like this, and someone else says, you mean this? And go, oh yeah, that would be a good word for it, because the left hemisphere is trying to catch up with what happened over here, too fast to follow, trying to find a word for it. Well, the first day we filled up the first board with words that described the effect of God. The second day we filled up the other two boards with words. And by the third day we were trying to figure out how to write more words in between all the little spaces anywhere on the blackboard, so the whiteboard. So they were completely, and it's all written in their local language and with their alphabet, so I can pick out none of this. I don't know a word on the board. But where I'm going with this story is two things. The first is that every time we would start this Emmanuel process, like I want you to write or listen to God, a flock of turkeys would fly into the yard. We had a big sliding door on the one side, it was kind of the whole wall. And they would stop and stick their heads in through the door, and they would stay stock still during the whole process until people started talking afterwards, and then they'd fly away. And all day long, every time, the morning, afternoon, whenever we said, okay, we're going to have this dialogue with God, what does He want you to know? The turkeys would show up and they would just stand there like this, looking. So it got to be a joke after a while. Here are the turkeys, they're coming back again. And so my question is, what did the turkeys see? Because they were paying attention to something, just stock still looking at something, until people just started talking again, and they would leave. Now they didn't fly away in fear, they just left in disinterest. But every time this interaction was going on, they showed up again. For 5 days we had morning and night. Every time we were doing this, the turkeys were there. So to me, there's something going on in that room I'm not seeing. But the turkeys could see it. And I never have found out yet what it is. But so I can't tell you, unlike the book, I can tell you why we ate the books. I can't tell you what the turkeys saw, but I'm sure interested in that. The second thing, though, is we wrote the list of what effect people had during that moment while the turkeys were watching and people were interacting with God. All of those words, and at the end of the week I discovered two things. One is that the room had not been full of Christians as I first thought. A large group of them were Hindus.
Wow.
And they had contributed just as much to the list as anyone else had. And by the end of the week, there were no Hindus in the room.
Wow.
And furthermore, all of these people who wanted nothing to do with trauma recovery were now saying, I wish I had brought my family and children here. And we're going to go back and teach this to our entire church. And we're going to actually go back now into the areas of conflict where the war was. And we're going to teach all of our children that we're people of God's presence and peace and joy. And we're going to teach that to every neighbor we have. And this is going to be central to how we are going to develop our communities. Now, I didn't tell them to do any of that. This just grew out of how they experienced this, and they were so interested in it They couldn't imagine not teaching it to everybody they knew. And in fact, the person who went to take me back to the airport said, well, we need to leave early to go to the airport. And so we did, but he stopped by his house and he brought out his whole family, all his teenage children and his young, kids, and he said, now, you need to tell my wife and my children and all of us what you told us this week. Teach them to do that, because I'm not going to take you to the airport till my family knows to do what it is you did this week. So this is the same people that when they showed up would not do trauma recovery again. But now they couldn't let me leave without their children learning this. So again, it has very little, I think, to do with technique per se, but the effects of our God, because that's what I would say after we make the list. These are the list of the characteristics, effects of our God. And so these are going to be the effects of his people. But this is what happens when our group learns who we are, because this is the effect we have on the world around us. And so this is, now we know our personality. Now the wonderful thing to me was that the two tribes that came in, when they first came in, they would not be in the same room at the same time. Rather reminded me of my mother and I when I was an adolescent, right? Like they'd go if the other group showed up. And so I thought, well, I recognize that fear response. I've seen it before. By the third day, they were busily playing cricket together, and they didn't bother to care who was on which team. So it wasn't our team versus your team. They're all they're all playing cricket together, as joyfully and happily and unconcernedly as possible. And I had not talked to them about tribals. I had not talked to them about I gave them no lectures on what Christians were supposed to be like. We just looked at the effects of our God. So what I want us to do is have one experience here together and write down what effect, what changed when we experienced God's presence. Give it one word, and then we want to hear the word, what it was. So I'll go back to it. Again, who would like to do the texting with God method? And who would like to do, so we got texting with God, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Huh? Do you have time for both? Probably. Okay, so we will then, at your suggestion, we're going to do both. So write down on your piece of paper thanks at the top, then an eye, draw a little eye, draw an ear underneath that, a heart under that, a nice little X for a hug underneath that, and then a hand below that.
Come back again on that.
All right, so the first one is thanks. So we're going to say thanks to God, then his response, and then we're going to write down, I see you, that's the eye, little eyeball. I hear you, which is the ear. I care about you, that's the heart. I'm glad to be with you, that's the hug, the X. And then I will do something for you, and that's the little hand. Got it? All right, so this is texting with God, a 256 character limit. You're trying to write down enough so that it reflects the thought that comes to your mind, not a dialogue with God of every thought that goes with it. These are just brief reminders to you that you're writing there. That's why we call it texting, all right? So I will give us, I'll tell you what. You go ahead and write these texts to God, and when you're ready, look up at this in my direction, and when I see most of you looking up, I know we're done. So rather than trying to guess how many minutes it's going to take, I will drink coffee and you will text with God. Now, as you're finishing up, and not everyone's quite finished yet, check and see if you have a peaceful sense about what you've written. Because if you feel peaceful about it, we're going to ask you to read it out loud. But one of the things we don't do in a group is, if you don't feel peaceful about what you've written yet, we don't read it out loud. It's not ready yet to process with others, unless it's a especially good counseling relationship. So just notice if you're feeling peaceful. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, being that most people are close to being finished, is that what we're going to do is, if you're feeling peaceful, we're going to read it in groups of 3. So you're going to read it out loud to 3 other people. The reason we're going to do groups of 3 is that if you do groups of 10, it'll take us forever to get through the whole thing. So it's simply a matter of, with 3 people reading, it's a limited amount of time. There are a couple of rules for reading this out loud. The first rule is you don't explain anything that you write. So you're not trying to explain why you put you put down 3 words when you wrote it down. You just read the 3 words that you wrote down. The first reason for that is when you try to explain it, it actually distracts you by getting you away from what God's trying to say to you, because it doesn't require explaining it to everybody else around you. You're just trying to see, did this mean something when this thought came to my mind? The people around you will know very well if it's going to give them peace, even if they don't understand the sentence, because there's more going on here than just understanding the whole thing. Almost inevitably, when people get to explaining, they lose their peace just because of the explaining of it. So, no explaining, just read what's there. That's the first. So, first rule: if it's not doesn't feel peaceful, don't read it. It's perfectly fine to tell other people, I'm not finished with this yet, so I'm not reading it. Doesn't mean anything about how spiritual you are. Often means something about how tired you are. Second is you read it without explaining. And third, you look up after you read it to see whether anyone is hearing something. Because you reflect in your face as you listen to it, whether or not you're hearing content from God. So you look up and see what's on people's face. And we're not going to make any comment. We're just going to, whatever our comment is, will be on their face. All right? Those 3 simple rules. Okay. So let's go ahead, get in a group of about 3. You could do less if that works, but 3 is best. And then quickly read, and then check what's on someone's face. Do that is help each person come up with 1 or 2 words that would describe what they experienced when they experienced God's presence or they heard something from Him. What changed? What would be 1 word or 2 words to describe when I heard this from God or read this? This is what effect it had on me. So help each person in your group to find 1 or 2 words to describe that for themselves. All right, I hate to interrupt the processes that are unfinished, but here we go. Let's go around the room and we'll have everybody at every table who's got 1 or 2 words, just go ahead and tell what your 1 or 2 words were. So I'm not going to repeat them, you just go ahead and everybody. Yeah.
My 2 words were reassuring, calm.
Peacefulness and clarity.
Affirmation and hope.
Not afraid.
Assurance.
Peace and love. Warm. Peace.
Calmness.
Supported, ignited.
Confident trust and just sort of a feeling of exhilaration.
Okay. Up here.
Peaceful. Assurance.
Security.
Peace and love from God.
Growing trust.
Powerful prayer, endurance and hope,
Guidance, trust.
Encouragement, comfort. Hope. Faithfulness and acceptance. Confidence, assurance. Lightness and perspective. Confidence and hold.
Known. Lighter.
Settled and expectant.
Grounded and assured.
Up here? Yeah.
Hope. Clarity and confidence. Assurance.
Peace and conviction.
Pain and comfort.
To be continued.
Hopeful.
Relieved.
Peace and assurance.
I care.
Peace and presence.
All right. So we're listening then to a little concert here of the effects of our God, what it feels like to have Him around and have His presence. And, you know, what I've heard so far makes me want more. All right? So let's get more. So now I'll just guide us through together, and what we're going to look for at the end again is we're going to have a collection of these expressions. But what I want us to do first then is to remember a time or something that you feel thankful for, appreciative or thankful for, particularly a time when you were aware of God's presence. I want you to notice when you can feel that feeling of thankfulness in your body again. What does it feel like in your body when you're feeling thankful or aware of God's presence? Now, for those of you that are aware of God's presence, I want you just to continue to enjoy that. Notice that as you're remembering a time you were close to God, is He there with you now as you remember that? So just take a moment to interact with Him. If you can't think of anything, just think back on something you like or enjoy and just focus on that. If you can feel that feeling of thankfulness in your body or God's presence, I'm just going to ask the question, what does God want you to know? What would He like you to know? Notice what comes into your mind. If nothing comes into your mind, just go ahead and focus on that, what you're thankful for or appreciating that you're remembering, and just enjoy that experience. Now, for those of you that noticed it or had some thought come into your mind when I ask you, what does God want you to know? I want you to notice if that makes you feel peaceful. Does that feel true and peaceful, whatever He wants you to know? If it doesn't, ask Him, what else do I need to know about this? Because I don't feel peaceful about what came into my mind. And if you do feel peaceful, then just thank Him for that. And if nothing's come into your mind, just continue to enjoy the experience of what you appreciate, enjoy, or are thankful for. Now, for those of you who are feeling thankful, I want you to think of one word or two that would express what it feels like inside your body when you're thankful or feeling appreciation. And for those of you who heard something from God, could you think of one word or two that would say, how did it change? How did I feel what I'm feeling inside change when I heard something from God? What effect did that have on you? And then we're going to share those words with each other in just a minute. So you want to write them down when we get done? Go ahead and write that down. And the other thing I would like you to write down is, have you thought of something that makes you thankful? Give it a 1 or 2 word name that would help you remember that memory. What was it that you were thankful for? Because sometime in the future you may need to feel thankful again, and if you've got a name for it, it will help your left hemisphere remember a thankful place, even if your right hemisphere can't feel thankful at the moment. And it's good to have a catalog of several of these to look back on when our mind is having trouble. So if some other things you feel thankful for pop into your mind right now, give them a 1 or 2 word name. So you make a little short list of the things, especially the ones that remind me of God's presence. So now you got a lot of stuff going on. I wouldn't normally have people doing these many things at one time. I'd have them talk about it, but we're going to stop and let you tell the other 3 people that you're with in your group, either give them the word for what it felt like in your body when you felt thankful, or a word or 2 that would describe what happened when you were aware of God's presence. Right? Could have had either outcome. Both are good. So go ahead and tell each other those words. It should take very little time because you're talking about 1 or 2 words for each of you. All right, well now we see, I see you're mostly done. So what I would like us to do now is go around and again, just say the 1 or 2 words. Now, keeping in mind that if I was aware of God's presence, this is the effect of being directly aware of God's presence. But if I'm thankful, that's the effect of being indirectly aware of God's presence. Either one works. So you don't have to tell us whether it was direct or indirect. Just say, you know, here's 2 words to describe the experience I had. And you can know for yourself whether it was direct or indirect, but for all of us, this is God's presence one way or the other. So just run around the room real quickly and let's hear the word or 2.
So reassurance again and peace.
Listen to.
Protected and lifted up.
Calm.
Overwhelmed.
Special esteem.
Quieted. Affirm.
Always with
Joy and patience.
Quite confident. Rest. Hugged. Connected.
Settled. Excited. Calm.
Peaceful.
Deep connection.
held. Calming and trained.
Relief.
Happiness. Provision and trust. Love. Faith. Insulated. Love. Rest.
And pursued.
Deeply understood.
Relaxed and delighted in.
Validated. Shalom, exhilaration.
Shalom.
Extremely peaceful and joy. Settled and calm.
Joy and warmth. Secure. Delight. Absolute peace and joy.
Safe and secure, calm.
Joy.
Okay, so now we're getting a list of the effects of our God directly or indirectly, but we're also getting the effects of being among our people. Because when we're among our people and we have the presence of our God, we can anticipate his effect will be spread around about us. So this is not only the effects of our God, but the effects we experience when we get together and we're gathered and being aware of him. So that again sounds pretty good to me, right? So now we're going to take this one step further, and You all wrote down, or most of you wrote down the name of your name for your memory, your thanks memory, your thankfulness memory. So what I want you to do is, with a new group again, ask everybody the name of their memory. And then you can ask them, do you want to tell us real quickly what that memory was? And if they want to tell you, they can go ahead and tell you. If they don't, they don't have to. But here's what I want you to do. As you're telling people your memory, if you decide you want to, notice the effect it's having on them to hear it. All right, I want you to look at their faces and see, as I'm telling you my thankfulness memory, what effect do I see on the faces of the people listening? All right? So far, so good? All right, so, but if nothing else, just give them the name. If you don't want to tell what's in it, you say, no, here's the name. Now, here's the interesting thing. 3 names that I often tell people of my appreciation memories. One is called Mango Tree. Can you believe it? Right? One is called Blonde. That's a funny story, I think. And another one's called Coconut. So I told a group about this, and we were one of these training groups, and what we did was we remembered each other's name. So all week long, as I was walking along, as a class member would walk past me, they'd go, Coconut. Right? I remember one of them, Mango. Remember one of them, their name was Submarine. I have no idea, nor do you have any idea what these stories mean. But every time someone would walk past me and go, Coconut, I couldn't help but smile. I couldn't help but feel the level at which joy rose by just walking past people and mentioning the little thing was just amazing, because we were bringing back to each other those moments of connection with God and each other. And just knowing the name without knowing the story was enough to let us feel like, I know something about you. I know that if I say Coconut to you, now if I say Coconut to you, it'll mean nothing, right? But say it to me, it will remind me of a time when God was close. And actually, Coconut takes me back to a place in Sri Lanka, which you now know a little bit more about, but you don't know why that coconut would do that for me, right? And why it would take me back to a good time in Sri Lanka instead of a bad time. But here's what I want you to do. Just give the name, and then if people want to, ask them, tell me like a 1-minute story of what that means to you if you want to. And so go ahead in your group, and if you tell the story, watch the effect on your listener when you tell them. Go ahead. All right, so I'm going to, instead of having each of us give a report right now, what I'm going to ask is, how many of you observed as you're telling the story, your story of your thankfulness or appreciation, or someone else was telling you, how many of you noticed a sense of joy in the person listening? Your listeners, right? So it appears to be almost everybody. So now we know a way to bring joy to other people's life, right? Want to be joy builders? We tell them a story of something that makes us thankful. Almost everybody experienced that as producing joy in the person listening to them. So are we trying to build a more joyful environment? Sharing our thankfulness stories has proved to be almost across the board a one way of doing it. How many of you would say that you feel closer to each other after hearing your thankfulness stories than you did before? So again, we have built chesed a little bit between almost everybody by sharing thankfulness stories. This is a relatively simple, low-tech, not too difficult way of having our relational circuits on with each other and sharing that with each other and using it to build joy and beginning traces of chesed. So if we were to have this as a common practice with each other, it wouldn't be long before we would notice from 30 or 40 or 70 of these that we're actually getting closer. Now, if we were to then ask God to help us what does he want us to know along the way? He would help us remove the barriers that are keeping us from feeling peace and connecting with other people. And then we wouldn't even have to share the stories of what was causing the barrier. We could just share with other people what happened after I experienced his presence. And so very often we have people, again, just able to tell, right now, and I ask God what I needed to know. Here's what I experienced. I don't even have to tell you what the barrier was, just here's what I'm feeling now. I'm able to experience that. And am I thankful for that? We can stop and thank God for that together, that he took a barrier out without you even knowing what it was, without me having to talk about it. And so this, this simple dynamic, if practiced regularly in circles, helps clean out the things that are getting in the way, help us build appreciation with each other, help us have a sense now. Now let's compare that with the 7 last words of Christ in terms of what effect will it leave from my sense of fellowship, from the list of words you just gave me. What will my level 2 have to say about that experience by comparison? Was anything scary happen? No. Would I have a kind of a pretty universal good? I think that was good. I heard a lot of good, all right? If that becomes the basis for my relationship with God and God's people, I have a completely different thing that it's going to do to my brain every time I want to load in. Let's get God's people together. Let's hear what, God wants to say to us, right? Because what'll happen? All these good things, all these experiences, that's strongly enriched. And I really didn't do much to bias any of your personal experiences of what God did with you, did he? Did I? No. So I have the feeling that, this is not something induced from the front of the room. All I gave you is an opportunity to experience God and then talk about it with each other. This is God having an effect on us. And then we spread it to one another. And so, again, the whole idea is that, to me, that's the normal life. That's not the unusual life. That's not a special spiritual moment. That could happen anytime, any place, with anybody who wants to experience God's presence. And you should feel afterwards more peaceful, more resolved, more connected with each other, more joyful, just as a result of having that happen. And again, I would have to say, that doesn't reflect probably my first 50 years of Christian experience. Completely different profile. And I think that's part of the reason why we have people leaving the church in droves. Because they're having a lot of effects from being together that no one wants to have. So why should I go back? Why should I take my children there? The post-Christian generation we live in right now is very relationally attuned, relationally inept as well. But they're looking for what will happen in relationship much more than what will happen from the front. They've lost any interest in truth on the left side of the brain. But can God come from the relational side of your mind and teach you so that it's true because it reflects the relationship as opposed to just the beliefs? What I would like to say is that we don't have to get people to believe all of our beliefs right before they can begin to experience God. So let's not be too resistant to letting people experience what it's like to be with God and share that with one another. The only thing is that my people have not been too used to doing that. Right? So level 4 is kind of like, I don't usually do this. This feels unusual. This feels kind of strange. Does it feel like something you don't want to get used to? No, I'd love this if it happened more often. You see, we're able to welcome this into this And it becomes a very gentle environment in which to begin to develop a new kind of person. And the sort of the final point of that, going back to the gentle response to weakness, is that we're all sort of weak at doing this together. Some of us are good at doing it by ourselves. We're all weak at doing it together. But if that's okay, we get together and do this because we actually need a lot of practice, then it's okay to bring your weakness in here. Matter of fact, if you had a time this week when you couldn't get God's presence, where would you want to take it? Wherever it is that people are pretty good at helping you experience God's presence at those times when your brain locks up and won't let you do it, because maybe theirs won't. And if there's no condemnation to me for doing this, then I want to bring it in there, because why should I go a day longer than I need to, feeling no peace, right? It's not really too subtle. It's not too complicated. Now, yes.
I just had a question. Sometimes I feel like my brain locks up when I might share a story,
Mhm.
and the person that I'm sharing this story with, like Joy, like has this look on their face like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and it's not a Joy response back, and I'm uncomfortable with this. Like, I don't know how to respond to that response.
All right, so your brain, someone doesn't know how to respond to that. One of the relational skills that we talk about is knowing when to stop. So essentially, quickly, someone else's brain is locked up. What do they need then? Rest and thankfulness. Let's get you back to a thankful spot and aware of God's presence, then we'll try this again. So the sooner you can notice, you just locked up. So I bet you just lost your sense of God's presence and thankfulness. I don't know what it was that I said, but I bet that's what happened. And the whole group around is going like, yeah, kind of what happened. And you go, well, let's all get back together to a sense of God's presence. I can stop. I can wait. And because almost anything could make someone else lock up. We don't know what level 2 isn't going to like, right? But since that happens all the time, we're not too concerned. We know how to stop and go back to appreciation and rest. If you haven't done it very often, then it's hard to do it when you're the one you're kind of leading, right? But if everyone goes around, you know what? So-and-so looks like they've just lost their connection with Jesus. Let me check. Is it all right with you if I check with them and see if they lost their connection with Jesus? Yeah, how about it? Are you feeling His presence right now, or did something lock up for you? Oh, no, not feeling it. Okay. Cool. Let's go back and remember a time. In fact, I know about you. This is the phrase you always use about those times that you feel connected with God. Let's go back to this because I know this about you. So if I lose Jesus, what 3 things could you use to help me remember Him real fast? Coconut? Blonde? Mango tree. Yeah. You could, any one of you now, the second I lost it, you could say to me, hey, let's go back to mango tree or coconut or blonde, one of those, and let's reconnect with Jesus. And I would, you know me, don't you? Right? You don't know what those stories are, but you know me. I'm going back, and that would unlock us with relatively straightforward ease. So again.
And if they're a believer, but they don't think that they can connect with Jesus like that?
Well, if they've been in my fellowship for 2, 3, 4, 6 times, they'll have watched 50 people do this 50 times, and you cannot believe it, but keep watching. And let's go back to appreciation. Can you experience God indirectly? Can you feel thankful? And almost everybody can get to that, right? So we're teaching our brain to do something it doesn't know how to do. And it's no easier than teaching it to read. So you're going to do it 50 times, and after a while you go like, I recognize that word. I didn't used to recognize it. We're teaching ourselves something. The brain is actually learning how to be Christian. And it's gentle because we're sure that something's going to go wrong in the process. And when it does, it's like, that's why you needed to be here. because we knew something would go wrong, and you're just the right place for something to go wrong, because it always does. And we're going to go back to Jesus, and if we don't know how to do it, actually I can ask him. Right? So that's the interesting thing for me. That's why I like to step out of the way as soon as I can. Because people go, well, what do I do now? And I say, is Jesus still there with you? Yeah. Well, why don't you ask him, because he probably has a better idea than I do. Right? You do that 3 or 4 times and people realize, oh, is he there? Yeah? Well, how about you ask him? I sometimes say it this way, if you had the designer of a computer there, or me, because I know something about computers, but if you had the designer of the computer there, or me, and something went wrong with your computer, who would you ask? All right. So do we have the designer around?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do we actually think Jesus knows anything about computers? Well, we'll find out next time your computer goes fritz on you. Who do you ask first? I almost never remember to ask Jesus. You folks are a lot more spiritual than I am. When my computer goes down, I do not go to ask him first, because I really do not believe Jesus understands computers. Right? I mean, I'm telling you the truth. I don't really think he does. If you ask me what do I believe, I'd say at some level I believe he does, but at a practical level, I sure would much rather have an IT guy than Jesus. Right? Until I start talking with Jesus about that, and then all of a sudden I find out, hey, you know what, he can guide me through this process a lot better than the IT people I know. You had a comment about that?
I was talking about the practical level. I was jogging on the trail one day, and a guy started having chest pain.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the right
Sick.
time. It was
Mhm.
dark. It was early in the morning, and so forth. I reached up and said, "Can I pray for you?" And he said yes. And I prayed, put my hand on his chest, and he started. And immediately, later he told me, the pain went away instantly. And so we walked back. He later at a meeting told the story, and he said, I had this chest pain, it was really severe, and Ted reached over to me and said, may I pray for you? Now I would have just as soon him say, can I call 911?
Mm-hmm.
But it worked.
Right. And sometime God may say to you, call 911, is what he wants you to do, or pray for it. We don't know till we ask him, right? So anyway, this is sort of what I'm trying to say is that we need to learn this together as a community. Otherwise, every time we forget, we won't know that the presence of God is available, and we're just the kind of people that wouldn't want to actually face any problem, even a computer problem, without having his presence there to guide us, because when we do, we have a sense of peace and joy and not being alone that allows us to be kind of present and learning who we are as a people and able to express that to other people. And so at the center of the whole idea of the life model was that what we've learned is that we learn to be a person by being part of a people. And that people that we're a part of has a hard time knowing how to be a people unless you have God present. And when God is present, what he does is he has you practice with each other everything you're learning from him and from one another until you begin to be better at loving him and others. And that will shape profoundly who you are. And the best way of measuring that is you will notice that you are beginning to love and respond with love to your enemies. So that the things that would previously have blocked your brain from saying no relationship is possible now, increasingly decrease, and the response inside of you goes, relationship is still possible. You may not know how to do it, but we know how. And when we don't, we know who to ask. So we extend into the world the possibility of relationship into more and more difficult places, because our experience and our faith has grown that even under these conditions, our God and us as people can now extend relationship where none seemed to be possible before. And when we do that, we're so thankful. So let us thank God. Lord, we thank you for this time. We thank you for being together. We thank you for extending to us the possibility of relationship. We thank you for bringing to us everybody who has trouble doing it, so that we can learn together how you could create a relationship under these conditions without tolerating and helping them to sin and become, more dangerous than they were before, but rather by teaching them that no matter what seems to be going wrong, there's a way back to relationship with you and others that you will let us know about, so that we can thank you, and so that other people would say, surely these people must be children of God. For that, we'll thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.